She thought he was just a drifter cowboy, but he owned half the state and hadn't loved in years. "You look like you could use a miracle or a mechanic," a deep voice drawled. Ellie startled, nearly dropping her wrench as she squinted through the dust. Her truck's hood was propped open, steam rising from the engine like a ghost. She spun toward the voice and saw him, tall, dust-covered, and sitting astride a black horse that looked like it belonged in an old western. He wore a battered hat pulled low over his eyes and a worn denim shirt that matched the land behind him. Ellie straightened her back, hands still clutching the wrench. "Depends on which one you're offering." The cowboy gave a half smile. "Well, I left my miracle kit back at the last ghost town, but I'm decent with engines. And horses, if you've got those too." Ellie hesitated. The sun was dropping fast, her phone was dead, and she was still 10 miles out from the ranch. Coyotes had started to howl in the distance. "Truck overheated," she muttered. "Or maybe the alternator's shot. I'm no expert." "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, dismounting slowly. She nodded, watching him carefully as he approached. He moved with quiet confidence. No rush, no swagger, just steady steps that crunched softly on the gravel. He set his saddlebag down, removed a rag, and leaned over the engine like he'd done it 100 times. Ellie crossed her arms. "What's your name?" "Robert." "Just Robert?" He looked up briefly. "That's what I go by." She gave a short nod, unsure if that answer satisfied her. He worked in silence for a few minutes, wiping grease from a hose and checking the fan belt. The sun dipped below the hills and the shadows began to stretch longer across the ground. "You live around here?" she asked, mostly to fill the silence. He shook his head. "Just passing through." "You from this state?" "Close enough to smell it. Far enough not to belong." Ellie didn't know what that meant, but something about the way he said it made her stop pressing. After 20 minutes, he wiped his hands on his jeans and looked up at her. "She'll need a tow. Radiator's busted." "I figured," she sighed. "There's a ranch about 10 miles west. Mine. Got a trailer and another truck there. If you can help me hitch it, I'll feed you dinner." Robert tipped his hat slightly. "Deal." It took another hour to hitch the truck to his horse and get her gear loaded into his saddlebag. She followed him on foot for a while until he insisted she ride. She climbed up behind him, awkward but grateful, trying not to lean too close, but the night air was cooling fast. When they reached the edge of her land, the old wooden sign greeted them. "Silver Bend Ranch, 1979. The lights from the porch glowed soft and warm against the dusk. Horses in the pasture lifted their heads but didn't approach. Robert led them to the barn and helped unhitch everything in silence. "You any good with tools?" Ellie asked as they unloaded the supplies. "Depends on the job. I've got a busted gate and a leaky roof if you're looking for work." He glanced at her. "Just a few days. Then I'll move on." She nodded. "Just a few days." Later that night, Ellie set a plate of stew and cornbread on the table inside the small kitchen. Robert sat across from her, freshly showered but still in those weather-worn clothes. He ate like someone who was grateful, not starving, and never once asked for more than she offered. She watched him from over her glass. "You ever settle anywhere?" He shook his head. "Not in a long time." "Running from something?" "Running toward peace," he said simply. That answer caught her off guard. The wind outside picked up, brushing the window panes with soft fingers. The night settled around them in a hush. They spoke little after that. She offered him the spare room in the old bunkhouse beside the barn. He accepted, thanked her, and stepped out into the moonlight. Ellie locked the door behind him, her brow furrowed. There was something about him, calm but distant, kind but closed off. A drifter cowboy, she thought. One of the old kind. She shook her head, poured herself another glass of water, and turned off the lights. But sometime just before dawn, A crash shattered the quiet. Ellie bolted upright, heart pounding. Outside, the horses were screaming. She grabbed the rifle by the door, threw on her boots, and ran toward the barn. She'd barely made it halfway before she saw them, 3 figures in the shadows, moving fast. One was already inside the barn, one of the doors hanging off its hinges. Then came the sound of fists grunting, a body hitting the wall. She raised the rifle, trembling, but then saw movement at the side. Robert. He moved like lightning, grabbing one of the intruders by the collar and slamming him against the post. The man dropped. Another charged him, but Robert sidestepped, drove a punch into his ribs, then swept his legs from under him in a move that was too fluid to be Cowboy, too clean to be drunk luck. The third man took one look at Robert and ran. By the time Ellie reached the scene, Robert was checking the locks on the stalls, calming the horses. "You okay?" she gasped. "Better question for them," he replied, nodding toward the 2 groaning men on the ground. She stared at him, stunned. "Who are you?" He met her gaze. "Just Robert." But Ellie wasn't sure she believed that anymore. Robert worked with his sleeves rolled and his words few. By mid-morning the next day, he had already repaired the broken barn door, reinforced 2 stalls, and fixed the loose hinges on the feed shed. Ellie watched him from a distance, chewing on the end of a pencil as she sat on the porch steps, her paperwork forgotten. In her lap, Ellie had seen grown men buckle under the weight of a stubborn horse or curse their way through a simple gate repair. But Robert moved with a quiet rhythm, like he had nothing to prove. His hands were steady, precise, calloused but not careless. He didn't rush. He didn't brag. He just fixed. And that unsettled her more than the break-in the night before. Ellie waited until the last nail was hammered in before approaching. Robert wiped his brow and turned toward her, like he already knew she was there. "Thanks," she said, her voice softer than intended. "For last night." He nodded. "You get much trouble out here?" "Sometimes," Ellie admitted. "Land like this tends to draw interest, especially from people who want to take what they didn't earn." Robert didn't reply. He just walked toward the trough and splashed water on his face. "You ever learn how to throw someone like that in a bar fight?" she asked, folding her arms. Robert looked up, water dripping from his jawline. "Not exactly." "You move like someone trained," she pressed. "Nothing." She stepped closer, eyes narrowed. "You know, it's real hard to trust someone who won't tell you a damn thing about themselves." He dried his face with a rag, looked at her evenly. "You trusted me enough to let me stay? That was before you started breaking ribs in the dark like some ex-special ops?" He almost smiled. Almost. "I told you. Just Robert." "And I told you. That doesn't fly here," she said, jaw tight. "You're either running from something, hiding something, or both. So which is it?" Robert looked out over the pasture. The horses grazed quietly, the wind tugging at the tall grass. He didn't answer right away. "Sometimes people lose things," he said softly. "And they don't want to talk about them." Ellie's jaw tensed, but something in his voice, some crack just barely there, gave her pause. She nodded once. "Well, you earned a few more nights," she said, her voice gentler. "That's all I'm saying." He gave her a small nod. "That's all I need." Over the next few days, Robert fell into a rhythm on the ranch. He was up before sunrise, helped with feed, patched a section of the fence that had been sagging for months, and even managed to calm Ellie's most difficult mare, Dusty, with nothing but a low whistle and steady hands. Ellie, for her part, kept trying to puzzle him out. She asked questions in passing. Where he grew up, what brought him west, if he'd ever trained horses professionally. But every answer was vague, carefully worded, as if he was building a wall even as he walked beside her. One night, after a long day of work, they sat on the porch, watching the sky turn from amber to deep blue. Ellie broke the silence first. "My dad used to say, Land was only as good as the man willing to stay and work it. Robert nodded, his gaze on the horizon. You believe that? I believe land remembers the hands that build it and the feet that run from it. She tilted her head. And which are you? He looked at her then, really looked, eyes shadowed but honest. I used to build. Then I ran, he said, voice low, still figuring out which one wins in the end. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ellie asked, You good with horses because you love them or because they listen better than people? Robert chuckled softly. A little of both. Ellie smiled. You ever think about staying in one place? His eyes didn't leave the land. Sometimes. You think about staying here? He turned to her, slower this time. Would it matter if I did? She blinked, chest tightening. I don't let people in easy, she said quietly. Me neither. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe even understanding. No declarations, no promises. Just two people who had learned to survive the hard way, wondering if maybe, just maybe, this time was different. Then, in the distance, the sound of a truck rumbled over the gravel road. Ellie stood, tension snapping back into her shoulders. That's Ray. Robert watched her face change. Problem? She nodded grimly. Big one. And just like that, the calm they'd built was about to be tested. The truck pulled up in a cloud of dust, its engine growling low, like a warning. Ellie stood frozen on the porch, arms crossed tightly across her chest, jaw locked in a way Robert hadn't yet seen. Ray stepped out of the driver's seat like he owned the land beneath him, same as always. He was tall, tanned, and wore a tailored button-down that didn't belong anywhere near dirt. His smile was wide, practiced, polished. Robert didn't like him. Instantly. Ellie, Ray said, walking toward the porch like he'd been invited. Long time no see. Heard your truck broke down. Thought I'd swing by, lend a hand. Ellie's voice was flat. Too late. Someone already helped. Ray's eyes flicked to Robert, who leaned against the porch post with casual indifference, but sharp eyes. Robert didn't move, didn't blink. He didn't need to. Ray's smile twitched. Friend of yours? Robert didn't respond. Ellie stepped in. He's helping around the ranch. That's all you need to know. Ray chuckled, turning back to her. That's so? I figured after what happened, you'd be ready to talk business. The offer still stands. It never stood, Ray, Ellie snapped. You just keep pretending it did. He tilted his head, mock hurt. Come on now. You know you can't keep this place afloat forever. You're a heartbeat away from foreclosure, and I've got the means to fix that. I'm not selling. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You sure about that? Because next time I might not come asking. Robert straightened. You threatening her? Ray turned, brow raised. Excuse me? Robert walked slowly down the steps. Calm, controlled. You came uninvited. You're pushing. I'd call that a threat. Ray took a half step back, caught himself. You don't know who you're talking to. Robert's smile didn't reach his eyes. No, but I know the type. Ray narrowed his eyes. This ain't your business, Cowboy. Robert's voice dropped. It is now. Ellie stepped between them. That's enough. Both of you. Ellie snapped, stepping between them. Ray took a slow breath, trying to recover his arrogance. You'll regret this, Elle. You always do. He turned, walked back to his truck, and peeled off down the gravel road, flinging dirt behind him. Robert watched until the dust settled. You okay? He asked quietly. Ellie nodded, but her fists were still clenched. He's not going to stop. Robert looked out across the land, his jaw tense. Then neither will I. That night, Ellie barely slept. She checked the locks twice, walked the fence line by flashlight, and jumped at every sound the wind carried. Robert sat in the barn. sharpening a blade with slow, steady strokes, eyes fixed on the door. It wasn't until just past midnight that it happened. A metallic bang. The horses panicked. Ellie was already running as Robert burst from the side stall, moving with frightening precision. Two men in black hoodies were halfway through unchaining the stall doors when Robert tackled the first one, driving him into the ground. The second man pulled a crowbar and swung. Robert ducked, countered, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted until the weapon dropped. One punch, two. The man was out cold. Ellie arrived with the rifle, panting. "You good?" she asked. Robert nodded, breathing hard but steady. They weren't pros, just hired hands. "Ray!" she spat. Robert knelt beside one of the men, checked his pockets, and pulled out a folded note. No name, just a crudely drawn map of her property with the stall marked with a red X. Ellie felt her blood run cold. "They were going to take the mare," she whispered. "Sell her. Damage the ranch's reputation." Robert stood, eyes narrowing. "He's not just trying to scare you. He's trying to dismantle you, piece by piece." Ellie felt something shift inside her. "I can't do this alone," she said. "You're not," Robert replied. The next morning, Ellie found him tightening the perimeter fence with fresh barbed wire. She brought him coffee, silent for a moment before saying, "You didn't even hesitate last night." Robert looked at her, hands still dirty. "Didn't need to." "You've done this before." His silence was answer enough. "Why do you hide it?" she asked. "Because the last time I fought for something," he said slowly, "I lost more than I gained." She swallowed. "And this time?" He looked at her, eyes softer. "Still figuring that out." She placed the mug on the fence post beside him. "Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here." He nodded. "So am I." But in the back of her mind, Ellie knew Ray wasn't finished. And Robert was starting to look less like a cowboy and more like someone trained to survive much worse. It started with a box. An old, dusty one shoved into the back of the loft, behind a tangle of ropes and broken tack. Ellie hadn't meant to find it. She was searching for extra blankets and nearly tripped over it. The box was heavy, metal corners, a rusted latch. When she flipped it open, a cloud of old barn dust filled her lungs. Inside were papers, dozens of them, neatly folded documents, yellowed at the edges, tied with a leather strap. And on top, an envelope with the name J.D. Harrison written in elegant, precise script. She froze. J.D. Harrison. It wasn't a name she heard often, but she remembered it. Everyone did. Years ago, it had been all over the news. Robert D. Harrison, the silent partner behind the largest land and oil acquisitions in the region. The man who had quietly amassed an empire by the age of 35 and then disappeared. Vanished, they said, after his fiancée died in a private plane crash en route to a charity gala. Rumors flew. Grief, scandal, guilt, betrayal. Some claimed he lost everything in a silent buyout. Others whispered he had staged his own death. Ellie stared at the envelope, then pulled the documents free. Titles, deeds, trust papers, and legal letters. Most bore his signature, Robert's. But not just Robert. Her heart raced. She climbed down the ladder, hands shaking, and went straight to the house. She needed confirmation. She powered up her old laptop, Googled the name, and there he was. A younger version, clean-shaven, sharper around the edges, dressed in suits worth more than her truck. But the eyes were the same. It was him, Robert D. Harrison, the man who had owned half the state, the man sleeping in her bunkhouse, the man who hadn't loved in years. She found him in the pasture later that evening, checking the fence line with one of the younger colts trailing behind him like a shadow. He looked up as she approached, reading her face before she said a word. "You found it," he said quietly. Ellie didn't answer. She just stood there, papers in hand, betrayal in her voice. "You lied to me." Robert exhaled slowly. "I didn't lie." I just didn't tell you. You let me believe you were some wandering cowboy, some drifter with a quiet past and a few regrets. You let me trust you. I never asked you to, he said, not unkindly. But you knew I did. He nodded. Yes. Ellie paced, her voice shaking. You're Robert Harrison. You're the guy who disappeared after his empire crumbled. It didn't crumble, he replied. I walked away from it. She turned to him, eyes sharp. Why? He paused, jaw tight. Because I built something I thought would change the world, and when the world broke it, I didn't have anything left but silence. She didn't speak. The wind blew softly around them, stirring the dry grass. Robert stepped closer. I never meant to deceive you. I just wanted to be someone else for a little while. Somewhere people didn't see money or legacy or failure. They saw a man with a hammer and a horse. Ellie's voice was bitter. And you let them. I let you. Ellie looked down, the papers trembling in her hands. You said you were running toward peace. But you're still running, Robert, even here. I know, he said, voice heavy. And I'm sorry. She looked up, eyes burning. I don't care who you were. But I cared who I thought you were. I'm still him, he whispered. Ellie shook her head, eyes burning. I don't know who you are anymore. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the fading light. Nothing in his hands but regret. Behind him, the colt let out a soft whinny. Robert didn't move, because for the first time in years, he realized what it meant to be seen and what it cost to hide. Ellie left before sunrise. She didn't leave a note. She didn't look back. The box of documents sat untouched on the kitchen table, a silent monument to everything she thought she knew, and all she now questioned. She packed only a duffel bag and drove her spare truck into town, needing space, needing air, needing something that wasn't Robert Harrison. She hated that name, because it meant everything she felt, every flicker of trust, of connection, was built on a half-truth. The man who mended her fences and rode her skittish mares in silence wasn't just Robert. He was a millionaire in hiding, a man with more power than he let on, a man who had been watching the world from behind shadows, letting her believe he had none. At the edge of town, she booked a room at a small roadside inn and tried not to think. But the silence was heavier there than it had been in the pasture. Later that day, she walked past the hardware store on Main Street and paused when she heard her name whispered behind her. Ellie? She turned to find an older rancher she vaguely recognized. Thompson, maybe. He held up a crumpled local newspaper. You seen the news? She took it from his hand, her stomach tightening. 2 more families pressured to sell. Ray Eastston expands development footprint. Her eyes scanned the article, the words blurring together. It was bad. The last line made her blood run cold. Eastston Development expects to break ground within 3 months on the southern edge of Silver Bend. Her land. Her home. The puzzle pieces snapped together. The pressure, the threats, the break-in, the targeted attacks. Ray wasn't just coming for her. He was sweeping the valley, choking the life out of it, one deed at a time. And she had walked away from the only man who could stop him. That night, the wind whipped hard outside her motel window. Ellie sat at the small desk, staring at the folded newspaper beside her untouched dinner. Every memory of Robert swirled in her head, his quiet strength, the way he always rose at dawn, the scars on his knuckles, the sorrow behind his eyes. He hadn't lied to hurt her. He had hidden to protect what little of himself was left, and she had run. Not because he wasn't who he said he was, but because deep down he had become someone she might love. And that terrified her. But now, love wasn't the point. Ray was winning. And Ellie needed someone who didn't just care, but could fight. At dawn, she drove back. The ranch was quiet. The front gate stood open. The air smelled of dust and horses, and something deeper, something like returning. She found him in the barn. Robert was brushing down one of the colts, sleeves rolled, movements steady, as if nothing had broken between them. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, watching. He turned, and when their eyes met, there was no anger, no demand, only waiting. "I read the news," she said. He nodded. "He's moving faster than we thought." "I know." She stepped closer. "I walked away." "I know that too." There was a long pause. Her throat tightened. "I didn't come back for an apology or an explanation." Robert looked at her carefully. "Then why did you?" "Because I need you," she said. "Not just the man with a wrench and a soft voice. I need Robert Harrison, the man who built half the state, the man who can stop Ray before he burns it all to the ground." His eyes softened. "Are you sure?" "I'm not sure of anything," she said, voice cracking. "Except that you never stopped fighting, even when no one saw it." He stepped forward. "And I never stopped wanting to protect this place, or you." Ellie blinked back tears. "So what do we do now?" Robert picked up a folder from the bench, a legal file marked in bold, Eastston Holdings, LLC. "We make a plan," he said, "and then we make it loud." Together they walked out into the morning light. Ray had power, but they had purpose. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to win. 3 days later, the old meeting hall in town was packed. Robert stood at the front, sleeves rolled, tie absent, his voice low but clear. A large easel behind him displayed maps, deeds, and a trail of connections, names of shell companies, real estate transfers, and financial footprints that led inevitably to one man, Ray Eastston. Ellie stood beside him, scanning the crowd. Farmers, teachers, ranchers, some angry, some scared, all tired of being quiet. "I know I haven't given you reason to trust me," Robert said, voice strong. "But you all know Ray's offer isn't business. It's pressure. You've seen it, felt it. I've seen what happens when men like him go unchecked, and I'm done watching." He held up a packet of documents. "These are legal filings for an injunction. I'll cover the costs. You just need to stand with us." The room was still. Then, an older woman raised her hand. "You really, Harrison?" Robert nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Then why help us now?" He paused, shoulders heavy. "Because I didn't before. And I should have." A murmur ran through the room. One by one, people nodded, then stood. By the end of the hour, 25 signatures sat on the paperwork, enough to stall Ray's project. But they all knew he wouldn't take that lying down. That night, Robert paced the barn, phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah, we filed the injunction," he said. "Hits first thing in the morning, which means Ray's out of options, unless he uses force." He hung up. Ellie stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You think he'll show?" Robert nodded, jaw tight. "He has to." The sound of engines cut through the silence, shattering the night. Ellie's stomach dropped. "They're here." Robert handed her a flashlight and a walkie-talkie. "Go out the back. Call Sheriff Lang. Tell him what's happening." "I'm not leaving you," she said, her jaw set. "I'm not asking," he replied, but she didn't move. Robert exhaled, then nodded. "Then stay close." They slipped into the shadows as headlights flared on the other side of the pasture. 3 trucks, figures jumped out, flashlights sweeping the land. Ray's voice rang out, cold and cocky. "Robert, come on out. We both know this land doesn't mean a damn thing without blood on it." Robert stepped into view, shotgun lowered but ready. "You made your move. Now back off." Ray snarled, eyes gleaming. "You think paperwork's gonna stop me?" "No," Robert said, his voice calm and steady. "But witnesses will." Sirens echoed in the distance. Ray cursed, fists clenched. "You called the cops." Robert's grip tightened. Number Ellie did. Ray spun around just as Ellie stepped out behind him, rifle aimed. "Back away, Ray!" Ray lunged. A gunshot cracked through the night. Ray dropped to one knee, clutching his side. His men scattered into the dark. Ellie ran to Robert, heart racing. "You okay?" He nodded, though a gash bled from his temple. "Close enough." Sheriff's cruisers tore down the road seconds later, red and blue lights slicing through the dust. Ray was arrested on the spot. Unregistered weapons, attempted assault, trespassing. The deputies didn't need convincing. By the time the sun rose over Silver Bend, the legal battle had just begun. But the worst of the war was over, and they had won the first battle. Together. Robert was slower on his feet the next week. The gash above his temple was stitched, his bruised ribs bandaged. But Ellie could tell pain had a way of settling deeper than muscle. She noticed it in the way he stood a little too long at the fence line, watching the wind tug at the grass. In the quiet sighs he let slip when he thought she wasn't looking. But he never complained, and she never left his side. They worked in rhythm again, like nothing had broken between them, feeding the horses, walking the pasture, tending to the small garden behind the barn. But there was something gentler now in their silence, something understood. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, painting the sky in warm streaks of peach and rose, Ellie found him sitting by the corral, brushing Dusty with slow, steady strokes. "You're going to spoil her," Ellie said, a soft smile playing on her lips. Robert chuckled, running his hand down the mare's neck. "She deserves it." "We all do once in a while," Ellie said, joining him on the bench, folding her hands in her lap. They sat in comfortable silence, the air heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Ellie took a breath. "You ever think about what comes next?" Robert didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted toward the hills. "Every day," he said finally. "I used to think I was built for building things. Deals, projects, empires. But lately—" He trailed off, eyes searching the horizon. "I just want to build something that lasts, something quiet, something true." Ellie swallowed hard. "You have." Robert reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn box. Not velvet, not new, just simple, like everything about him. He opened it to reveal a silver ring, delicate and hand-worked, with a faint engraving on the inside. Ellie recognized the script immediately. It was her mother's handwriting. Somehow, Robert had taken a line from an old birthday card she'd once left on the kitchen table and had it etched inside the band. "Come home when you're ready." Ellie's breath caught. Robert didn't kneel. He didn't make a speech. He just looked at her, eyes full of quiet, raw honesty. "I haven't loved in years," he said softly. "And I didn't think I ever would again. Not like this. Not where it mattered." Ellie blinked back tears. "I don't need a church," he added, voice thick. "I don't need a crowd. I just need you. And the sound of your boots on the porch every morning." She laughed through the tears, then nodded, voice trembling. "Yes." Robert slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit like it had always been waiting for her. They sat there a while longer as the night crept in and the stars blinked into view, one by one. No fanfare, no flash. Just two people quietly, completely choosing each other. After all the noise, after the fighting, after the long road of grief and guarded hearts, they had come home. And this time, they would stay. 1 year later, the hills of Silver Bend were greener than they had been in decades. A slow spring rain had rolled through, coaxing wildflowers out of the hard-packed dirt. Horses roamed the pasture, their manes fluttering in the breeze. Laughter rang from the barn, children's voices light and full of life. The ranch was no longer just a home. It was a refuge. Ellie stood on the porch, a sleeping infant tucked against her chest in a woven wrap. Her daughter, Wren, had her father's steady brow and her mother's quiet stubbornness. The baby stirred slightly as Ellie watched a group of teenagers saddle horses under the guidance of 2 volunteers. Across the field, Robert walked beside a boy of about 10, holding the reins of a patient mare. He moved more slowly now, not from age but from purpose, like every step mattered. The boy laughed at something Robert said, and Robert ruffled his hair. This was what they had built. After the storm of Ray's downfall and the court battles that followed, the community had come together. People Ellie never imagined would stand in the same room now worked side by side. The ranch became a nonprofit center, offering equine therapy for veterans, at-risk youth, and families who had lost too much. Robert never put his name on anything. He didn't want attention, he just wanted to give back. Ellie walked down the porch steps, careful with Wren's head tucked beneath her hand. Robert saw her from across the corral and smiled, that quiet, easy smile that still undid her every time. "Morning, Mrs. Harrison," he called, waving. "You're late for breakfast, Mr. Harrison." He met her halfway, kissed her forehead gently, then peeked at the sleeping baby. "She's perfect," he murmured. Ellie leaned into him, eyes closing. "She is." Robert wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer as they stood together, watching the sun rise over the valley they had fought for, the home they had rebuilt, and the life they had finally claimed. And this time, they were both exactly where they wanted to be. "She's out cold," Ellie said, glancing down at Wren asleep against her chest, like her father after fence duty. Robert chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Fair." They walked together, the golden light warming the earth around them. Near the entrance to the ranch, a sign creaked softly in the breeze. It had been freshly sanded and lovingly repainted, mounted to the original post her father had put up decades ago. The new name was carved deep in the wood. Robert stared at it, his jaw tight, eyes misting slightly. He let out a slow, measured breath. "Think your dad would have liked it?" Ellie nodded, her gaze steady. "He would have liked you?" Robert's eyes softened. "Took me long enough to earn that?" Ellie reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You earned it the moment you stayed." They stood there a while, watching the wind roll through the hills, the grasses bending and swaying like a sea of gold. Wren slept warm between them, her tiny fists curled against Ellie's chest. The ranch was alive with sound and spirit. Children's laughter, the gentle neighing of horses, the creak of old barn doors. They had lost so much, but they had built more, not with steel or oil or power, but with love, with truth, with the quiet daily decision to keep choosing each other. As the sun rose higher over Harrison Ridge, Ellie looked up at Robert and smiled. "Let's ride," she whispered. He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Let's." Together, with Wren tucked safe against her mother's chest, they saddled 2 horses and rode slowly up the ridge trail. They followed the winding path toward the same hilltop where Robert had once stood alone, watching the land, thinking he would never belong again. But now, at the top, he looked down, not as a drifter or a ghost of who he had been, but as a husband, a father, a man who had come back to life, exactly where he was meant to be. Robert and Ellie didn't just find each other. They found healing. They found purpose. They found the kind of home that can't be bought, only built. Because love, real love, isn't about who you were. It's about who you choose to become together. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even the loneliest heart can find its way back to love, then please consider subscribing to Soul-Stirring Stories. At Soul-Stirring Stories, we bring you heartfelt, emotional tales that remind us of one simple truth. Tap subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and join our growing community of story lovers who believe in second chances and soul-deep love. Thank you for watching, and remember, wherever you are, someone is waiting to ride home with you. Soul-Stirring Stories.